Hey, what's up, Canada and beyond? Welcome back. It is Tuesday, September 24th, and we're going to have a really great guest on to talk to today who's got a lot in common from a perspective of Ireland. And they've written a book, and this is going to be a really great discussion, kind of no holes barred. So, welcome, guys. If you're new here, make sure that you hit the like and the subscribe button. And if you're not new here, you know what to do with that. So, just before we bring Emmet on here, this is going to be a pretty powerful conversation. So, make sure that you bookmark this one. Got just a minute of course, regular scheduled maintenance for everybody. Before we get started with our wonderful guest, get plugged in on the Substack, folks. If you missed last night's show with Peter McIsaac, you definitely missed out when you want to talk about tackling tyranny with actionable solutions. If you're not new here, you'll know that on Substack is where we bring all of the receipts, all of the links, all of the information, everything you need to know about the show that we host here on this platform. The best, fastest, easiest way to find that link, because it's a really big link, is to go to whatsupcanada.org, and everything that you'll need, you'll find here. This link will take you to the Substack and let you get plugged in there. Everything is, of course, free, guys. There is no cost to any of the content that we make, and I've been dropping the ball a little bit on our Set Me Free Patriot Switch partners. So if you click on that link, come over here. I did a little fixing, and this is how you get started. But guys, honestly, I've been putting my money where my mouth is for quite some time. I bathe, I shower, I do laundry, I clean, I eat vitamins, and I will not support the deep state and the cabal that pays that you pay every week out of your payday for these products. So put your money where your mouth is, get a better product, and from patriots that is not funding communism in China or any of those other crazy places, guys. Patriot Switch is how you defund the cabal. So it's only $1 right now for a year for a membership. And I'll tell you what, that is absolutely mind blowing. So, maintenance, regular work out of the way. It is my pleasure and humble opportunity to have Mr. Emmet Connor on the show tonight. Uh, Folks, I honestly, Emmett and I just got a chance to meet briefly just before the show started. I didn't know much about your story, Emmett, so I'm going to get you to kind of start with all of that. But for me, in this platform, usually I do a lot of research, a lot of homework. I'll have a deep understanding when people come onto the channel. But you came highly recommended from some friends of the channel here, Chris Vleck and Jody Ledgerwood over at TFM Report, who we collaborate with over on LGM.news regularly. They both sent me messages the morning after apparently you were on their show saying, I have to have you on. So it was kind of a done deal. But I did take a look, at least briefly, into what it is that you're talking about. So I'm going to shut up here right now and let you tell your story a little bit, who you are, where you come from, and how you come to be in this, interesting and probably amazing time and place right now.
Good evening, Wayne. Great to be here. So I'm an author and an analyst, and I kind of was doing YouTube about 2018, talking about globalism. I did about 20 to 25 interviews about all the big issues affecting Ireland and Western countries in general. So the box standard stuff of mass immigration, climate change movement, feminism and abortion, trans, BLM, all that stuff. And then obviously that was around the time just before COVID, and then the BLM events in the States as well. And I kind of had been interested in bigger picture subjects for years, and I was casually learning about communism since 2012, and along with everything else, your conspiracy stuff and New World Order, all that type of thing. And then around 2019, 2020, I noticed there was like clearly an international globalist communist element to everything that was happening, yet nobody was really talking about it. And I was very interested in the fact that in Ireland, like in a lot of other Western countries, you've a lot of people like us who are trying to stop this globalist machinery, who don't consent and so on. We're opposed to its effects. But yet there's this other contingent of people in our countries who are supporting it and going along with it. And it's not just the elites or the government, it's average everyday people with no wealth or no political power, yet they seem to be brainwashed and beyond reason and are supporting this globalist totalitarianism. So I started to look at what was going on here, and I started to join the dots and realized a lot of it was based on the class struggle principle of oppressor versus oppressed in communism, which is originally about the rich and the poor. They're using that template to push all these other different agendas on us. You know, someone's being oppressed and they need to be rescued, whether it's women with feminism or the planet with climate change. Is the same formula again and again. So I looked around the public discourse and thought, well, this is clearly a factor, but nobody's talking about it. And they were assigning blame in all these other areas. And I thought, really, the indoctrination is the problem. If we had a population of people who there wasn't this brainwashed element within it, we would all be against the state, and it would be, unfeasible for them to do what they do. So I kind of thought that's quite interesting. And I was going to do a documentary on this, but when I start typing, I had a lot more knowledge than I realized, and the pages started to add up and rack up. And before you know, it was a few hundred pages. And I thought, this has to be a book, unless I want to do a 50-hour-long documentary and spend the rest of my life editing and doing voiceovers. And I thought, no, this is a book. So that's when I got into it. And I actually finally got it published in May of this year. So it's taken a while.
So I have a bunch of questions in there and all that. So when you started to put all of this together and put it into a book over this time frame, I think the Western world got a real reality slap with COVID as to how completely stunned, deer in the headlight look at the enforcement of the Marxism without having understood how deeply it got entrenched into everything, into our culture, and knowing that politics runs downstream of culture, we weren't really paying attention to the implementation of this ideology into the systems, the systematic implementation of it. And I saw a graph today, and I believe it was just referring to U.S. institutions where they were, looking at left versus right, and there was no parity. It was like 85 to 90% hard left, instructors and teachers and professors in all of the institutions. And this was something that I had started looking at specifically here in Canada, when this was, again, kind of for me an uncomfortable pill to swallow when I realized that the foundations of the Canadian higher education and learning systems were largely compromised by people that were brought over from the Eastern European collapse and calamity of 1945 that was creating the foundation for that, what ended up being World War II. But a lot of those people ended up here, entrenched, embedded, and have slowly been working this machination. And Glenn Beck did an amazing podcast on it about a year ago that I only stumbled on a few months ago, talking about the capture of this ideology in Hartford specifically, and how this was put in and then entrenched into kind of where we're at now. Then fast forward to COVID, and here we are, where John Q. Public or all around the world is defending themselves against this ideology. How challenging was it to get your book published?
Well, I actually ended up with only two options in the end. I had one publisher in the States, here in Texas, who was offering kind of a hybrid deal where it would have cost me like $7,000 or $8,000 up front, which I didn't have at the time. So I found another publisher who gave me a traditional deal, and it was 10% per book sale, and you keep the rights, but they do the editing and so on, the layout. And so I finally got somebody, and they kind of are I needed to find someone who wasn't going to have any issues with the subject matter, of course. Otherwise, they wouldn't agree. So finally got someone on board, and it's been good. I mean, I don't really mind too much about the details as long as the message gets out there and the book's
Right.
available. I'm happy. That's the main thing.
Well, on that note, I'm going to pull it up here for everybody, and then we can talk about what the book is all about, and you can kind of explain to us. This is the website link, guys, to Emmet's website. You guys can go and look at it and pull it up and order your copy. And I want some reviews back on all of this, because this is, what you've done here, Emmett, is entered into a conversation that is forbidden for the most part. And there's this cognitive dissonance is absolutely epic. So take us for a little bit of a walk on your book here, The Red Pandemic, the Global Marxist Cult. When that for me was honestly, when I first looked at who you were, when I was told to get you on a show, I was like, okay, that's enough for me. I want to know. Tell me about it. Am I correct, or am I batshit cray cray, as our government tries to insinuate?
Yeah, this issue is very old, and dealing with this ideology, it's very, very good at repackaging itself and deflecting blame away
Rebranding.
from itself. Yeah, absolutely. And the cover of the book shows all the different kind of sub agendas or initiatives that they push. And I wanted a book cover that would catch people's attention and that immediately starts joining the dots, because you know how we're up against this globalist machinery with all these enablers, these cult members who are beyond reason. They're enabling all these agendas, and we all of us have mostly been talking about the symptoms of the problem without
Right.
talking about the origin, and trying to push back against all these elements as if they were different. But the average person in the street would have no idea there's a connection between the climate change movement and feminism, or sometimes perhaps BLM or the other elements, or the fact that we don't have any borders and that there's no national sovereignty. Unless someone understands the modus operandi of Marxism, they won't make the connection between these things. And I found that to be a massive problem. And my kind of approach is, it's a kind of a simple approach, but a cutting edge approach to a really old problem that's very old. And I mean, for over 100 years, back to the Soviets in America in the 1920s, they were already engaging in subversion and brainwashing people and encouraging people to call their opponents fascists and racists and so on, even back then. So they had a few years head start on the OSS and the CIA and so on. And it's even older than that, as far back as the French Revolution. And what's amazing about this is that people still can't see it, even though it's literally controlling their lives. So if
Mhm.
someone's going to work in London in their car and there's a bunch of climate activist crazies on the streets, they're being affected by this and they're being irritated by it, but they don't know it's Marxism. Or there might be a guy in a relationship with a brainwashed female who's feminist, and he can't reason with her. Again, that's Marxism, and how the climate change movement is affecting the economy, et cetera, et cetera. This has been affecting all of our lives for decades, and COVID as well had the fingerprints of communism all over it, and people aren't joining the dots. And I think it's because this ideology is very good at repackaging itself, and particularly people's definitions of the terms can be problematic. And you will even get into debates over what the words mean of Marxism, socialism, communism. And while we're all having these debates about the semantics and the terms and so on, this machine is still rolling on, and it still hasn't been stopped up till now.
Well, this, one of the things that really struck me right away. You know, for me, the go-to reference on this process is Yuri Bezmenov when he emigrated here, and you've probably seen his interviews when he was telling us, as clear as day. And to this day, that was 1985 already. People still don't see it coming. They still don't understand it, and you're taking it to that next level when you add the word cult to the discussion, because that is, it's evolved even so much more from Yuri's day. Where the communism that he was raised in was different than what it's evolved to now, and they knew about these gender bending, psychopathic, ways, and tools to destroy society and to create that wedge of inequality, and that is the entry point, and the breaking of everything. Well, we must have equality. This people are done hard by these, so we must absorb from the state. The state must absorb and control everything so that everybody gets equality. And but that's gone so much more, how do I say it, evil, with what they're doing to the kids, this whole trans, insanity. And it is absolutely insane, and insanity is unsustainable, and so is that. And we're at a point here now where we have to realize that, it's going to have to be the people identifying the problem and saying no to the problem, or continue to suffer the problem, and it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, yeah, and as you mentioned there, you think of the amount, say, with the trans movement and all the other different sub agendas of which are on the cover of the book. It's like this thing has caused so much, an almost incalculable amount of suffering and death since it's kind of infected the planet. If we want to say 19th century, or even the French Revolution thereabouts, it's caused all these problems, and people aren't joining the dots, and then they don't know what to call it, and then obviously because. So people don't like the consequences, but the key to stopping this is to deal with the problem of indoctrination, because this, as you mentioned, the universities earlier are probably the most despicable institution in society in the West right now, because they're churning out all these activists, and they're constantly dragging more members into the movement and getting stronger and stronger, while the rest of us, many people don't even know that's what we're up against at all. And it's really they've managed to permeate into so many different parts of society. And as you mentioned, also the Soviet, Yuri Bezmenov, who's got his whole section in the book dedicated to Yuri, and ideological subversion and the Soviet method was actually just one kind of one chapter in the story of Marxism and all the different ways they have of destroying civilization. And he definitely was a great whistleblower for that. But then you've got other forms like, say, the Frankfurt School connected in with it. Also, the Fabian Society, the British Fabian Society is another very old one. So they've got all these different tools and methods, and it's like one big family or one big criminal gang or a cult movement who has this long tradition of subversion, brainwashing people, and so on. And also postmodernism is another factor as well, if you want to get into that, which is why they're so brainwashed and fanatical. It really does draw on a whole spread of different kind of tools to get its own way, and it's so good at it that it's literally destroying civilization and causing the destruction of countries and peoples and ruining people's lives. But we're without understanding the brainwashing and fighting against the indoctrination and winning the ideological battle, I think we're not going to win this struggle at all.
Well, so much to tap into there in all of that, and you're 100% correct on that. People, they don't understand that this is death by a thousand cuts, and it's being turned inward on our societies, and continuously creating wounds. And I wanted to address some of the symbology on your book. A lot of this is very familiar to me as soon as I start to look at all of the research that we've done, and the against the Antifa, the anti-fascists, and looking at all of these sub hives of collectivism that are literally become the cells of these multiple global entities that have been doing this for 1,000 years. The internet just gave them the opportunity to do it at scale globally, hence New World Order making their move. But so much of this symbology is not just relegated to just the schools and the Antifa. What they did was they created these Borgs, these mentally programmed individuals, but they needed to, as they were churning them out, give them organizations, groups, communities, so that began in the unions, which have now become the communities of the products of these institutions. So now we've got the next generations of these Marxist cult foot soldiers working with their seniors, that basically have captured the unions and every institution. In Canada, anyways, nearly every institution has been captured by activism, whether it's the judiciary, the policing, our military has been utterly neutered, and all the way up the food, all the way up the food chain. These guys have built their own utopia within our society, and they just kind of flipped the switch in COVID and took command and control of it all.
Yeah, they really have been very efficient, and it's as you say, death by a thousand cuts. It's kind of a broad spectrum attack on all of the institutions in society. They're very good at it. Part of it is the long march through the institutions, which was an idea put forward by the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci as far back as the 20s. And Lenin had similar ideas as well, Vladimir Lenin. So, I mean, they're very good at this, as you said, taking all these institutions. It's all across the West, and they've managed to do it in the same time frame as well, which is quite remarkable. So the same in Ireland. And, the controlling the labor union movements and socialism was the start of it in the 19th century, and feminism as well. And in the 20th century, the ideology evolved a little bit more, particularly after World War II. You had the more neo-Marxist types like Gramsci, Georgi Lukács of Hungary, and then the Frankfurt School later. They all kind of had impacts in their own ways. So it wasn't just about the poor overthrowing the rich with a violent struggle. It was a bit more nuanced than that. And
100%.
particularly when the academics got involved, and you had Herbert Marcuse at the Frankfurt School literally admitting in interviews that basically the working class, the proletariat, were actually comfortable within capitalism, and they didn't want to rebel anymore. So he suggested the idea we need a revolutionary energy from somewhere else. So these people are mental. Rather than admitting that, the ideology is poison and it's not required anymore, they just alter the formula and change it. And Lenin started that back in when he hit his writings before the Bolshevik Revolution, saying that, well, Marx was wrong. The workers weren't going to just overthrow the system organically. They needed to be pushed towards a revolution. So that kind of thinking is very dangerous. They're basically saying that people don't know what they want, but they do want a communist revolution. So it's this level of arrogance, that's spawned things like the United Nations and the Club of Rome and made it a big global affair. And that's why they're literally forcing us towards this ideologically, this one world government, this new world order, because they think they know what's best. And then you have the gargantuan egos and so on. So this thing is, as you're saying, this is really mutated into something a lot bigger. And it's we've never seen anything like this on the earth before, not even close.
And this is again one of those finer points for me that was of interest to bring up and talk with you about, because that's exactly it for me. I've studied Marxism. I studied the history of conflict for centuries and centuries, and I've been engaged in high level discussions around the planet, and I think that is part of the problem with people not connecting the dots is exactly as you said. The world has never seen this before. This is a giant chimera of a hybrid of Marxist communist cult ideology weaponized with fascism and technology and technocracy and medicine and all of the sub tools of it, that they've been able to capture through, because they needed the programming, the mental programming, all of these tools that they needed, but they've been able to co-opt and bring in these endless public-private partnerships. So it's the which is wagging, is it the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail? Is where we're at here now. People want to point at, well, that they're all communists. Well, yes, they have all of the traits of communism as well. But when you look at the physical side of it, they're functioning and operating in almost in lockstep with what the fascists do with the merger of corporate and governance. So
Yeah, yeah.
that whole thing we don't know how to resist it because we're looking for one identifier that we can one target, and it's not like that.
Yeah, I actually think this is part of the problem, and I address it in the book that if people are assigning blame in different directions, it stops us from dealing with the main problem, which is Marxism and Marxist indoctrination. And to take up your point, might take might I know it's a little controversial, but it's certainly different to most of what I've heard. I think that it's a bit of a distortion. It is true that the official definition of fascism is the merger of state and corporate power in order to what you call it, control the people, pretty much, and run the system that way. And because traditionally people look at communism as being, well, there is no private enterprise, or socialism, there's no private enterprise. So therefore, what we were dealing with COVID, for example, was clearly fascistic because, the pharmaceutical companies and the government working together. So then people reached a logical conclusion, which is fair enough, to kind of say there's a fascistic element. But I actually would like to point out that communism has evolved so much. Like, look at what happened in China. I think Deng Xiaoping, I think, was the first man in charge after Mao. The communists, as I said, have mutated and adapted. They realized that if you go full on communism and try to centralize everything and take away private enterprise, you're going to collapse the economy, and then you can't have your revolution anymore. So they learned to adapt and adopt liberal economic policies. So then communism started to look a bit more fascistic, like, say, with China. And you look at, say, analysts like James Lindsay, who I respect very much, is very knowledgeable on this. Even he will kind of jump to that, have that conclusion and call it fascistic. But I think it's a distortion of the details slightly. And I think it actually doesn't help, because obviously the more we point fingers at the boogeyman of fascism, the more Marxism and Marxists get off the hook. So I have a lot of people in Ireland who have that opinion. We're dealing with a mixture of fascism, but I actually think it's actually counterproductive, because what it does is it stops people focusing on themselves and their society and their level of indoctrination in the country. And on top of all of that, if you look at the different sub-agendas on the cover of the book, the different initiatives, they're all based on the class struggle principle of oppressor versus oppressed. That's where the brainwashing comes from. And the ones enabling all these things are clearly Marxist in their outlook. So I think that even if it is true there's a fascistic element to this, it's definitely true that it's much more Marxist than it is fascist. And I think that equating them both together actually kind of works against us in a way, which I know is a different take.
Well, I think that's where some of the brilliance in their evil diabolical plans have been, allowed them to adapt to their machinations in different countries and different regions, dependent on the the laws, and they 100% the ideology behind here in Canada. And these might be some of the things that from a global scale versus from the inside might look a little bit differently as well. From the global scale, I 100% agree with you, and that's the ideology that is comes from on high. But in Canada, it's pretty hard to dismiss the mountain of evidence of the extension of the Reich in Canada. I mean, I've spent years detailing that here in Canada too. So when I see the levels of control and the implementation there, their orders are from on top are 100%. That Marxist cult, in my opinion, but the foot soldiers are the fascists in Canada that are getting the job done. I guess that's probably much. If I had to compare, use an analogy, the brown shirts were useful to Hitler until they weren't, and then they were disposed of. And at the end of the day, the fascists here in Canada that have been doing the grunt work will be disposed of as well. But right now, that's what's been working for them here in Canada is because all of the money, all of the influence comes from exactly that here in Canada. The merger of the the non-governmental organizations, these things that ultimately end up with us having our properties either owned outright by foreign countries like China or Saudi Arabia, or are in partnerships with the World Economic Forum. And our government is almost solely, at the behest of the World Economic Forum, which in their own language says that that's all that they exist for, is the merger of the the state and corporations. So I think that this is, the clouds look different at different, from different altitudes and perspectives. And these are some of the things that maybe, because all of our countries that are experiencing the same, oppression from multiple ways are experiencing it at different speeds, different capacities. We're at different points on the curve of all of this. I, and again, this is just how I see it from inside Canada, liking, and some of the comparables I see elsewhere. So I think we can both maybe be a little bit right on this, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, all the internationalist organizations, and this is why I think this has been in front of our noses for years, that the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, the World Health Organization as an arm of the UN, and then the World Bank, the IMF, any organizations that have an internationalist slant have their ideological roots in Marxism, because it's an internationalist revolutionary ideology that wants to dominate the world and create a socialist federation of the world. So, and then other organizations as well, like the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Club of Rome, like I mentioned, the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Group. They're all internationalists, and they all come from the same ideology to have world domination. And as for the whole fascist thing, again, I'd just like to point out that within the ideology is all encompassing. It will control all facets of society and bring everything underneath its control. So we're up against an internationalist monster, and the solution, I always say, is to actually have a part of the reason why I don't talk about the fascist element and go along with the conventional analysis of that it's a mixture of the two, is because the solution out of this mess is for us to develop a more nationalistic attitude, to have a more sovereign countries, we decide our own fate and so on. And at least the difference between them, even conventional definitions between Marxism and fascism, is that at least with the fascist regimes of the past, they had a nationalistic element. So I'm willing to prioritize them based on what's more kind of toxic. And so my point is that if we move towards a more nationalistic point of view, that's the solution to globalism. And that's actually why we're in the mess we're in. We've allowed this ideology to convince us that we should be more open, be a member state of the world. And in Ireland, Ireland should be a member state of the European Union. It's always about looking outwards and being open. And that's why we have the destruction of national sovereignty, which is probably the most damaging aspect of Marxist infection.
That's something that our illustrious imposter here, Lord Farquaad, his first statement when he was accepting his victory was that he was going to turn Canada into the first post-nation state. And nobody had a clue at that time what he was actually saying. They thought maybe he'd had one too many champagnes or something. But I think it's becoming blatantly, painfully more clear by the day to even people that, no matter where they're at here in Canada, particularly, the metrics of suffering are making them go, I think we're starting to understand. And it's that's the and in Ireland and you're right about the destruction of the national sovereignty, and that actually plays a much bigger part in all of this. And right now Canada is really literally got the sword on its throat with Bill C-293. You're probably not familiar with a couple of these bills that are going on up here right now, but there's two in particular that literally mean the end of Canada as we know it. I will go to jail for this conversation when that bill passes. Literally, that's it's they've here in Canada. You've heard the Online Harms Act. That's been rolled into an omnibus bill here to include anything and everything as a climate, as a pandemic emergency, including climate crisis, anything that they want. And BLC 63 literally gives people the power to anonymously report that Wayne might say something and they might be offended. So I will be deemed immediately guilty with a $50,000 fine. They'll get a $20,000 reward for protecting the public. And I will be under house arrest and be silenced from all media platforms. That's what's on the table right here in Canada right now. The tokenization of every blade of grass, and every, literally given themselves to declare an emergency pandemic and force us to eat crickets. And if you don't like it, you're going to jail. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
in our Senate here right now in Canada. So this race to the end of our national sovereignties, and that's what that is, when we can no longer say, think, or do anything without the approval of the state, not even the permission, but the approval. How do you call yourself a country?
Yeah, and they've just eroded things, and they're kind of there's a section in the book about the Fabian Society, the British subversive socialists, and the whole idea of gradually wearing down, changing society through kind of gradual, constant change, and getting us used to one thing, and then playing another card and cranking up the pressure on the noose around their neck, sort of thing. And it's really tragic to see what's happened to Canada. And in Ireland, we're not that far down towards dystopia, but there was another hate speech bill defeated recently, another attempt to push it through. So they're trying the similar stuff, but not at the same level. But when it gets to that point where, they're turning society into rats, and people, trying to get people to rat on each other and stuff, things have gotten really bad. And it's at the point where people like ourselves will be, and communism is a history of doing this, anyone who disagrees with the regime is a little bit crazy and should probably be sent off to an insane asylum or the gulag. They have a long history of doing that, and using the police force and so on. And had Albania with Zigarimi, the Securitate in Romania, of course, the famous KGB, the Stasi in East Germany. They've been doing this a long, long time, and controlling people's speech and hate speech. All these. I have a whole section in the book about the terms that they use. Controlling speech and creating this social environment where if you disagree with any facet of the ideology, if you don't agree with Marxist activism, you must be a racist, Nazi, homophobe, transphobe, etc., etc. And they shut down discourse on a ground level in society, so people can't even gather together as a group and try to resist. It's despicable, and they seem to always be one step ahead of everyone else.
Well, that's exactly where Canada's at, and I watch some of these nations where I have friends, and I see, it's like a long battlefield where it's moving. It's always moving in different rates and different places. And in Ireland, the weapon there that's been the most effective has been the dissolving of the natural society there. The rate of replacement, that's the only accurate way to describe it. That has been the most effective thing to disrupt your guys' ability to protect your sovereignty in any capacity. So it's the it's the same thing in all of our country, just nuanced a little bit more specifically to each of our countries. And I think that they're getting desperate. And this is, Canada, I think, is one of the show ponies of this new world order, rules based, not law based, and not nationality based, or not nation's best interest based, but the Geneva rules based order. They're afraid of losing their grip of control, and this is why I think the escalation and the acceleration on so many counts in so many different countries. Why what's bad is getting infinitely worse. They're like pot committed, and is there a capacity to break that satanic lullaby? Because I'll tell you what, when I think about how many times I got ratted out for doing what I do, and during COVID, if that was any kind of an indicator of how quickly people will rat me out for doing what I do when these things become law, I think it's too late for us here in Canada then. At that point, we can't argue with them. They're, Yuri said it best. You could put a mountain of evidence on their lap, and they're not going to believe anything you say.
Yeah, again, we've never seen anything like this in terms of indoctrination, where people are literally brainwashed to be traitors and to turn on their own people and to facilitate the destruction of their own countries, their own ethnic groups as well, in the case of places like Ireland. And they're beyond reason, and they are convinced they've got this ideology's now got a monopoly on virtue. It's managed to convince people, the difference between right and wrong is simply the Marxist interpretation of what's right and wrong. If you're not with the oppressed, there's something wrong with you. If you don't want to bring migrants into the country, you must be a racist. If you don't want Muslims to dominate over Christianity, you must be Islamophobe, etc., etc. You lack compassion. There's something wrong with you. If you're not emotional about the planet and you want to save it, again, you're insane. They just have all the bases covered, and they've been building up for this quite a while. And the postmodernist element as well, I mentioned in our correspondence about, the idea of another tentacle in Marxism, where they literally ended up having monopoly over logic, so basically there's no such thing as subjective reality. It's not no such thing as objective reality. It's all subjective. So if I want to turn around tomorrow and say that I'm now a woman, you need to respect my opinion because that's my truth, and so on. So they just have all these different bases covered. And as I talk about this a lot, indeed, the word cult is on the cover for a reason. It encapsulates them perfectly. In a cult movement, traditionally, it's just like the stereotype that they believe they're in a group that's insular. They think everyone outside the group is insane. They think they are sane. They have an aggressive attitude towards everyone outside of it. And they literally see you as being subhuman and in a lower class if you don't agree with their activism. That's part of the irony of Marxism. They say they want to create a utopia where there's no classes, but they actively create a subclass with their oppressive actions. And during COVID, they wouldn't allow us to travel. You couldn't even go to the grocery store, or, sometimes, or you could only travel a certain distance from your house for exercise purposes. That's oppression. but they say they're against oppression. They're the biggest mess, a worst class of human being that's ever been on the planet, and they actually think they're the top of the food chain. It's quite amusing.
I do spend a lot of time mocking them, and it's exactly that. The hypocrisy is, and the charade of it all is, they're all about inclusivity unless you ask a question. Well, then you must be excluded, and then it's just excluding you isn't enough. You must be, you must be put down the memory hole. You must be dissolved, completely eradicated from the ether if you dare to ask a question or contradict or the hive mentality. And it's I think a part of what we struggle with, and I think of Star Trek or whatever, some of those other ones, these Borg like creatures, and we tend to want to look at them and feel empathy and sympathy, shake them. There's a human in there somewhere. Wake up and realize you're destroying humanity. But it's that is the struggle that is futile. I don't think that we can get them, those individuals like that. So it's difficult for us to let go of that and be more effective, I guess. Do you think that's maybe something that we have a problem with?
Oh, I think this is a massively, massively important issue, Wayne. It's like, of course we want to be good people, and no one wants to live in a war. We talked about this kind of being a war. No one wants to live in a war, and we wish we could have nice, happy, comfortable lives. And we enjoy that. We prefer that, definitely. Who wouldn't? But unfortunately, this movement forces our hand. And when you're dealing with this level of indoctrination, every time you acquiesce or take a neutral position, you allow them to encroach further. And the only way to deal with fundamentalist ideologues is to take them on and stop them physically sometimes, because they're never going to give up. They're never going to take a backward step. They're absolutely convinced that they're right. And on top of all that, they're programmed not to listen to us. The postmodernist influence programs them not to self-reflect. There's no such thing as objective logic and so on. So their emotions take the lead, and the movement's very good at sucking in all sorts of damaged personalities, people who are big ego problems, people who can't control their more feminine emotions, people who are very grandiose and think they have a great purpose in life without the intelligence to back it up. So it takes in all sorts of personalities. And again, they get that nice. I talk about this a lot in the book because this is a psychological issue, this indoctrination. They get this kind of nice, warm feeling. They're part of something special. They're bringing in utopia, and we are all mistaken for getting in their way. We all have mental problems, and we're angry. We don't have enough love and compassion and so on, which is why they hit us with all these labels. And in my opinion, as our friend Yuri said a long time ago, we are stuck with them. They are contaminated. You cannot change their mind, even if you show black is black and white is white. It doesn't matter anymore. He said they're programmed to react and respond to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. So if we say no to mass immigration race and so on, so they are the definition of NPCs. And again, we've never seen anything like this on the earth, not even close.
This is so the pattern, and in what we see here in Canada, and it's here, and we go through a few. It's like, if you don't support the war in Ukraine, you're inhuman. You must be a Nazi or a communist. If you don't support from the river to the sea in Palestine, how dare you? You're inhumane. These people, blah 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 blah, and it's the same arguments, the same people that are then arguing a nuclear war would be good for the planet to cool it off, the global warming, and yes, we should obliterate a few billion people. It's the same people with the same arguments, and every single one of them leads to the end of humanity and society as we know it.
Yeah, and I think what you pointed out there, and I actually have a section in the book where I talk about this, that hasn't, it's incredible nobody's talked about this, particularly in the psychological or the mental health field. We have a worldwide contingent of people all across in all these different countries with the exact same views, and also, which is a bit of a giveaway, the same knee-jerk emotional reaction if you don't agree with them. And so, as you pointed out there, obviously Palestine Israel is a much older issue, but it's definitely the PLO was controlled by Moscow. There's definitely a Marxist element to the Palestinian cause because it's part of the Cold War between East and West, and it goes back in history. Ukraine is newer, but as you say, yeah, there's definitely a pattern with all the Western governments and the political left all seem to be on the one side in all these issues, and that's kind of a giveaway as to the globalist agenda is what it's trying to push, what it prefers. Just look at Marxists. When you go and talk to them, how they discuss things and what they're passionate about tells you what the system is trying to push, because they are the ultimate gullible foot soldiers for this international totalitarianism. They're literally walking advertisements for what the system has in store for us next. It's really quite remarkable.
For this, for me, how, and we do talk about mental health on this platform quite often, simply because I spent 15 years in emergency services, and I have a deep-seated understanding of trauma, and I worked with people that were specialists in neurolinguistics programming, and people that are specialists in dissecting and undoing a lot of these programs, including the MK Ultra. I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people that are really qualified in this area, and one of the things that I identified early on was the trauma response, nationwide, society wide, and this is where a lot of this is literally, it's trauma response. That is what they're programmed to do, say, react, or behave in that crisis moment, and I mean, it's the same neural pathway process and work as when I was used to be on an accident scene or something, and somebody knows, you're telling them they have to get up and walk, but then you literally have to hold their hand, tell them to stand up, and say, okay, take a step, and you're leading. They know how to walk. They know how to walk, but they cannot connect to the dots of what they have to do. And this is, that same deer in the headlight paralysis. They know there's something wrong, but they're still stuck with that programmed response that whether that's accurate or not, that's where they're at. And people are That's the dystopia, I guess, is trauma. In my opinion, it's a large part the trauma that's been inflicted in a thousand different ways upon all of our societies that has kind of allowed that programming, that Marxist programming, to take over those trauma responses and dictate the flow of our societies.
That's a brilliant takeaway, and I'm going to steal that one. That's good. The trauma. It's a great link because you're dead right, and it makes sense to my analysis as well. That the what drives this revolutionary activism, which is pushing them to cause all this destruction, is that someone's being oppressed, and when there's a trauma present or some sort of pain present, it can elicit emotions in other people as well, not just the traumatized themselves and this wish to care and so on. So yeah, it all kind of rolls in together and it kind of makes sense. And as well, when trauma is present, whether it's physical or psychological, it obviously tends to be traumatic. It's discombobulating. It knocks a person out of their normal state of mind. And that lays the foundations really, really well for indoctrination. And actually, you might be interested in this. One of the areas that I think there's other people have written books about this before and so on. But one of the things I discovered about the indoctrination, I thought this is really the issue. Why are they so brainwashed? Why is it so potent? I discovered this by accident. Because when I was younger, I was interested in subjects like secret societies, the occult, and so on, and New World Order stuff. And there's a concept within there that basically that it's easier to brainwash someone when they're kind of traumatized or they're in a higher state of emotion. And I noticed that with the oppressor versus oppressed class struggle principle, you're immediately splitting people into two groups, the oppressor on one side, the oppressed on the other. And it usually generates two sets of emotions at the same time, which are quite strong. So towards the oppressed, it's all sympathy, empathy, concern, compassion, the soft feminine emotions. And towards the oppressor, it's usually condemnation, judgment, and so on and so forth. And the Marxists, you see them having these emotional reactions all the time. But when two of them are created in the mind at the same time, they actually force a person's consciousness onto a lower level into the limbic system, I think, or the more reptilian kind of part of the mind. And that lays the foundation for the indoctrination. As far as I know, I'm the only one who's pointed that out on this subject before. And I think I'm onto something here, because we have to find a way to counter this. And obviously the best way is to keep people away from the indoctrination at all. And maybe in the future we'll find a way of curing people of this brainwashing, but certainly understanding it really deeply is not going to do any harm.
Well, Michelle, if you're listening out there, you're going to meet my new friend Emmet real soon, because you two have a lot to discuss. She's a 26-year trauma practitioner undoing a lot of all of this. And so this is where we come by a lot of understanding here with our community about, and I tend to simplify things, I am not that overly educated, but I do have innate understanding and volumes of experience in so many of these different things. So for me, I identified the trauma impact, and it's really simple. Once you've gotten anybody isolated, demoralized, depressed, beat down, dejected, it's really easy to control whatever direction and whatever behavior you want out of them. And that was achieved, shall we say, very, very rapidly and very effectively with throughout the 2020s, shall we say, the last several years. But I think that lens is shattering. I think our side is definitely of the conversation is definitely growing a lot faster than their side of the conversation, but we've still got a long ways to go on that. We're getting kind of down to the tail end of this here, Emmett. This has been a fascinating conversation. What do you want to make sure that we have a bit of an idea or a grip on, or for folks to think about?
So in terms of what we can kind of do, I think that we are in an ideological struggle, and I think we need to start to win the war for hearts and minds, particularly in the young, because this movement, as we talked about, has control of all the institutions. And while we are having this conversation right now, somewhere in the world, there are bunches of kids, depending on the time zone, are being injected with this nonsense. It might be feminism or the climate change movement and so on. And before it was in the universities, primarily in Western countries. Now it's at all levels of education. So I think safeguarding the young is important. One of the target groups of the book is parents, because unfortunately parents, in addition to all the other things a parent has to do, now they have to keep their kids away from educators or social care workers or psychologists or whatever who may be contaminated with this ideology. So we have a real struggle. I firmly believe that if we win the ideological battle, the more we suppress Marxism and expose it for what it is and keep people away from it, the more we starve it of membership, which is its main kind of blood supply, while we simultaneously bring people back to traditional family values and patriotism, nationalism, and, just to be anti-globalist in our stance. And I think, rather than try to pick off each issue that we mentioned earlier, the ones on the cover of the book, rather than pick them off individually and see them as all separate, let's just starve the ideology from the ground up. And I believe that things will turn around.
Up here in Canada, it's become very identifiable. It goes under the SOGI curriculum, SOGI 1, 2, 3, they call it up here, which is sexual orientation and gender instruction. And over the last 2 years, has really mounted into a very, very organized pushback, finally starting to have some results here in Canada. Still a long ways to go on that, but it's reached the courts in trying to end this insanity and this abuse of children, because this is literally it's just abuse of and weaponization down the road of these children. So it's good to know that we're kind of on the right track with that from the ground up here in Canada. Still a long ways to go, but I wanted to ask you before we let you get out of here, Emmett. You're from my understanding is you're in the United States, kind of tracking the run up to the election there. Is that the next book, or is that kind of following and understanding with this last book? What's going on with that, and what are you seeing happening down there?
Well, I kind of had the idea before I come over, Wayne, of obviously promoting the book and raising awareness about what's happening in Ireland. And also, I thought it would be interesting to be here for the run up to the elections. I understand that a lot of people, obviously, this is bigger than just politics, but obviously we should pay attention to politics as well. I understand a lot of people think it might be theater, and some, believe the left and right are controlled and so on. But I also think it's interesting to see about the balance, how clearly the Democratic Party and so on, and Harris and Biden, clearly they have they're Marxist in their leanings, and they're trying to destroy America. So I'm very curious to see, the kind of how many people are allied with patriotism, how many people are brainwashed with Marxist ideas, and how many are patriotic Americans. And I was kind of interested in that. So, depending on how things go, I'd like to do a little bit of reporting, with YouTube, and talk to people, and do some videos and so on. And so, I've got a little bit to go before the elections, but that was the plan anyway.
That's I hope it's living up to your interest of or expectation of interest from this side of the theater, and I agree. It's in with that sentiment, tongue in cheek. It is all theater, but it's theater with impact. There is real world consequences to the theater. Yeah, but with Kamala, I see her as a shining star of a media construct of communism and Marxism. So she does have those genetics in her. Some of it she got here in Montreal, up in Canada, actually, even. But it's the media construct behind her that is, in my opinion, the real threat, because she doesn't have two whistles going in between her ears. But that's just my sense of humor when I regard that. But it is absolutely the most interesting of times, for sure. So
Yeah, the cardboard cutouts, that's another classic when your country's being subverted, when you have these cardboard cutout leaders like Biden couldn't walk from here to the kitchen sink without falling over, and he's pumped out of his mind on drugs. That's how the country's starting to collapse, when you don't have someone who can even speak English properly or walk across a room. Things are getting bad.
Well, and that's what makes it so laughable, and it's just right across the board, whether it's Kamala or Joe or Trudeau or Ardern or Macron
Yeah,
or, Starmer, any of these guys, they are all cookie cutter cutouts of the same globalist stamp amongst them, and
yeah,
it's worse than Monty Python at this point.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for Emmett for finding some time to give us some insights and some things to look forward to. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on a copy of your book and gleaning out of it, some more tools that folks can use to resist the indoctrination and the Marxism, because that's where it starts. Wasn't it Marx that said, "If you give me your child for 4 years, from the time they're, I will own them for life," and that's we're seeing a few cycles of that, and that's kind of what we're up against now. So we got to break that cycle, the chain or cycle at the bottom, and let that bad food coloring flow out. So.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think we're literally saving lives by doing this. We're literally stopping people getting indoctrinated because, in my opinion, most of the time when someone becomes brainwashed with this stuff, their life is over. They're essentially finished as an authentic human being, and there's no turning back. So, it's tragic, but the more people we can stop getting caught into this net, I think the better. We have to at least try.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Emmett. Very intriguing conversation. I'm going to have some stuff to think about, and I'm going to have to probably watch this one back again. I don't generally do that. I never watch back a show, but this one I probably will, and maybe we'll get a chance to do it again soon. So enjoy your adventure in the US of A, and
Thanks,
do
man.
look forward to chatting again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Wayne. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. All right, guys. I hope you guys our brains are as full as mine is right now. That was definitely a conversation we don't usually get a flavor of. So I think this is absolutely on point. And if you're interested, again, I will pull up the link for Emmett's book. There is, of course, within the Substack and in the show notes, you'll find links for it as well, and to also follow Emmett on X. And I can pretty much, I'll take any bets that you'll be hearing from Emmett again soon on some of our other affiliates and friends platforms. Big show tomorrow, guys, with Nicola Charles, the White Rabbit podcast, from Down Under, the land down under. How does somebody go from being a international soap opera star to politician to getting shot at for being a podcaster? We're going to hear all about it with Nicola tomorrow, and stay tuned for some special stuff with Jim Ferguson tomorrow as well. All right, guys, I love you all. Stay mighty, my friends, patriots, prisoners, and hostages. Check out our partners, and we'll see you in same time, same place tomorrow. Bye for now.